Hi students, this video is all about how to get a great sounding pinky vibrato. I will give you exercises so that even in high positions and with a short pinky you can get solid intonation and a very good pinky vibrato. Now, aren't we all jealous of this? Now, what you see Hilary Hahn doing is that she chose a fingering with a lot of fourth fingers, because it's practical for all the two-set fans. And this is a fingering that might be similar to more of the romantic school violinists. For example, the fingering of Auer, but he instructs to play a lot of harmonics there, while what Hilary Hahn does is to make this beautiful lush vibrato with the fourth finger. Now remember that you can't get a good fourth finger vibrato if your pinky doesn't really function well in the first place. So if you don't really have reliable intonation of the fourth finger, and if it collapses all the time, that you don't really have control over how you place your finger, then you can't do a very good pinky vibrato. So you must first fix your pinky, so to say. And Hilary Hahn stresses a lot in her master classes, even when she's teaching very talented and professional players, that it's so important that you balance the hand on the third finger, so that, for example, the first finger goes back, then that you balance it around the first or the second finger, and that your pinky needs to stretch all the way there, because then it has no space to move, and also it will be weak and it will be very unreliable where it ends up. So that's something that she mentions a lot in her masterclasses. So that is one of the secrets behind her pinky of steel. Later in this video I will discuss whether you really should have this really arched pinky. But first let's fix your fourth finger. So if you place your fourth finger, then remember what Hilary Hahn says is to balance around the third finger. To have a hand like this and not so much like this. Now, especially for adult beginners, I will give you a very easy stretching exercise. We'll go into more of the advanced technique later in this video. So if this is not for you, you can skip it and go on. But put your fingers around the neck of the violin. Be really careful. Pain is a sign that you are doing it wrong or too tensed. Or that you're doing it too much. So just do what feels good for you now, that you have a nice stretch, but it shouldn't hurt. Okay, so that was the whole warning disclaimer thing. Now, when you hold the fingers around the neck, then carefully, slowly place the violin on your shoulder like you would normally hold it. And then you will notice that your elbow is more here, so that your hand is around the violin. And maybe if you're doing this for the first time and if you're an adult beginner to the violin, then you can't go further than this. And this is already a nice stretch. That's good. It works. So you can go further and further. This is exaggerated practice, because your pinky doesn't need to go that far. If you can place your pinky all the way there, then this will be possible. But you instantly have this good left hand hold right away. Now, if you are playing scales and exercises, sometimes they look a little bit like this. And in exercises like that, you are mainly training the stronger part of your hand. There's a time and place for those exercises. It's great for flexibility and velocity. But you do want to specifically train the weaker part of your hand. And if you're playing, for example, a scale on one string, I just trained my first and second finger, little bit my third finger, not my fourth finger. So be very conscious what you are training when you're practicing, because if you don't train your fourth finger as much and it's already smaller and weaker, then it will stay a problem. Great exercise for fourth finger strength is left hand pizzicato, because in left hand pizzicato you can do this on all levels. On a beginner level, you can do them on an intermediate level, on an advanced level. You can make it as easy or as crazy as you want. Then you specifically train the strength of the weaker part of the hand, because left hand pizzicato is mostly done with the third and fourth finger. Now you can start by just plucking the strings with your fingers, just the open strings, and then do that with every finger, every string. Now you already see that the left hand pizzicato forces me to curl the pinky around the string, just like I would pluck with my right hand. You curl your finger and you grab the string and you release it. So that's something that I also do with my left hand, you see? So I curl, and this is great practice for that weak pinky. So you can practice open strings with left hand pizzicato, you can practice arpeggios, you can practice scales. I explained all about this in last week's video, in which I show you what to practice when you have very little time. It's great for finger strength. There are also some drone scales and some stretching exercises in there. So then you can really fix your pinky. And if you have that nice, strong and arched pinky, then you have a good basis to go into fourth finger vibrato. Now, if you look at various performers, then you see that the pinky isn't arched all the time. You must have the strength and the control to arch it. And certainly for double stops, for example, to really put it over the string and on the other string. But, for example, vibrato works best if your finger is slightly tilted. So you see Hilary Hahn doing that on longer notes. And let's look at, for example, Maxim Vengerov. You can see it very well in this video. A straight pinky, but a strong, secure and controlled pinky, which is something different than a collapsed pinky, because it's simply too weak. So you don't need to have your pinky arched all the time, and I'll show you why. If I vibrate with a nicely arched pinky, which is great for fast runs and playing them securely, then I can do a vibrato, but it's a really narrow vibrato. And that is because if I place my finger nice and arched, I just have this little tip of my pinky finger to vibrate. And that's why I can never have a nice wide vibrato, because it's limited by this little pinky tip. Now, what you can do to create a nice lush and wide vibrato, and what you saw Hilary Hahn and Maxim Vengerov in these examples do, is that when they have longer notes, they do the pinky a little bit like this. And then I can suddenly have a wider pinky vibrato, because I can use the whole pad of my pinky and not just that tiny little tip. So it's just simple physics. And the thinner your fingers are, the more limited that tip is for vibrato. So you really want to place your finger flat. And in violin playing, there is no rule without an exception. So I don't recommend playing like this all the time, but I do recommend that you train your pinky well so that it's strong and that you have control over it. And then, depending on the situation, you decide how to place your pinky, how that functions best in between the other notes, and what the function of that note is. Is it a very important long note in a cantilena passage like the Mendelssohn concerto? Then you can place it flat to create the best lush vibrato. But if you're playing fast runs, then you want that nice and arched pinky. And now just in these first couple of lines of the Mendelssohn concerto, we already have some great examples of how to place your pinky in different ways to create the best sound. For example, this part, depending on your fingering, of course. Then you might want to stay in that third position and stretch up for that E. Then you have something similar after that. And here you might have a more round pinky, slightly more round pinky, so you can play that D sharp. And what you see a little bit later on, here you have just a short note. You want to vibrate a little bit on it because it's the first beat of the bar, of course, but you really want just to hit it with that fourth finger, like you see Hilary Hahn doing so strong. Now we've just talked about the shape of the pinky. Now let's talk more of the overall posture. Now it's important that you embrace the violin with your arm. Because if I hold my arm like this, in an exaggerated way, some people are doing it just a little bit, then it's really hard to reach the string with your fingers. If you do more like this, then your fingers can easily find their place on the strings. And then also you can more easily play a good vibrato with it. Now in higher positions, you need to make sure that if you're shifting up, that you're not just shifting over the string in the direction of your nose, so to say, but that there's also a motion that goes in this direction. So a position shift goes in two directions. This direction, just following the fingerboard, but also this direction. So even if you're playing in high positions on the G string, that you can still have a good vibrato simply because your fingers are able to reach notes on the G string. Now some people write me that they have difficulty with those high positions on the G string. Mostly it's because you simply don't train it that much. Go practice a 2-octave scale on the G string, for example, like I showed in last week's video about the drone scales. That can be really helpful to let your fingers find that position to play there also. And again, there are no rules on the violin where there is no exception. I am trained in the school where even in high positions you really press the string down on the fingerboard. You need strong fingers for that. But there are also schools who teach you that in high positions you shouldn't press the strings down all the way. So see what works for you there, if you press the string down or not. So speaking of pressing down the string, this is a great exercise to place your fingers nicely arched and you just press down the string and lift. Pinky push-ups, and especially train the weaker part of your hand, which is mainly the fourth finger and then also the other fingers. Another great tip for a pinky vibrato is to lift the other fingers, to give that pinky a lot of space to vibrate. Just search for the position in which you can make the movement. Do it without a bow. Just see if you can wobble around your pinky. And see how the rest of your hand needs to be shaped. Of course, this only counts for longer notes, because if I'm playing really fast runs, you must keep your fingers as close to the string as possible. But we are talking about a lush pinky vibrato here, so that's usually on longer notes. So for a lot of people, lifting the fingers makes it possible to vibrate more. Versus, yeah, here you don't have that movement. So do it without a bow, because with the bow it will sound very drunk. But just see if you can move, and do this in a low tempo. And then, as I explained in my video on practicing with a metronome, and the section practicing vibrato with a metronome, is then train this movement in different rhythms. Now what I also find helpful, and this is a little bit of a weird exercise, is that you vibrate with a different finger with which you can easily vibrate. For example, the second finger. For me it's easy to vibrate with. Maybe it's different for you. And then listen to the sound and try to imitate that with your fourth finger. Might be a weird exercise, but for me it has been helpful. So I hope I have answered all your questions about pinky vibrato and have given you some great exercises. Now what will really help you is my last week's video with some exercises to train the weaker part of your hand. That will help a ton creating that lush pinky vibrato you dream of. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye.